Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining in. This is the fifth episode of my podcast. And today my guest is Jeff Hursey. Jeff Hursey is one of the expert TSA in Cisco collaboration sales team, and he has been practicing Cisco CX, which is customer experience, in his job role. So we would like to hear from him about CX. And Jeff, please introduce yourself and we will get into the topic.
All right. Thank you, Yasin. I really appreciate the invitation to your podcast. Very excited about what you're doing. I started working with Cisco about 11 years ago. And in that time, the roles kind of evolved a bit. We were back then just doing, business requirements-based selling, really no discovery there. And we were really kind of stuck with IT, working with IT primarily, and we needed to figure out a way to get out through IT, get the blessing from IT to actually talk to business stakeholders. So somewhere around 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago now, we started asking different questions that allowed us to get around to the business and started asking important questions around customer experience. I started out, Yasin, in telephony clear back in 1981. So I went into the U.S. Army, and they one of my military occupational specialties was in telephone central office repair, which translated really, really well to the civilian world. When I got out of the service in 1989, I was hired by NCR Corporation, and fortunately, they hired me to design and support their call centers. Now, as you could probably imagine, way back then, we weren't talking about customer experience at all. We were talking about design from the business perspective. So we were talking about market-centric or channel-centric or product-centric designs. Customer experience conversations never even came along until after the turn of the century. So you can see, I think back in 2001, 2002 is when we started to see the first articles appear around customer experience. And I was enamored by the whole thing. And so I started to get on board with customer experience and talking customer experience within the businesses where I worked. And then fortunately, when I started with Cisco back in 2010, that translated very well for our customers. So I don't do internal consulting as a contact center technology solutions architect. I talk primarily about technology from the customer experience perspective and customer experience design. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself, probably more than what you wanted, right?
That's great. That's great. I think perhaps, this is still a very new concept for a lot of people in the industry. And oftentimes the TSA or SE, whatever you call them, they basically jump into the technical jargon and try to convince the customer from the technology perspective. But I think oftentimes we completely miss out the bigger picture in terms of why do this customer wants this solution or this product that you're trying to sell. And I think this is really, really important for us to explain, and first for us to understand and then explain to the audience as well. So how do you define customer experience at a very high level, like 30,000-foot overview? I'm sure there will be a lot of young engineers watching this video podcast. So how would you define them like a very high level?
So I since I'm a technology solutions architect and so engineer talking to engineers, if you want to learn more about customer experience, you can simply go out and Google it. I don't look at it from I don't want just to give you a customer experience definition. That's not going to be helpful to the audience here. I prefer to think about customer experience design. Design is a very important thing that we have to consider because when we're designing in the contact center space, when we're designing with a number of things in mind. We consider what customers are thinking, feeling, and doing at every stage throughout the consumption process. And so CX practitioners typically capture these dynamics in what we call a customer journey map. And that map just simply helps us to visualize what customers are going through every stage of their journey with a company. So, the goal, what are the goals? What are the big goals with customer experience? The big goals are to really create customer loyalty, right? To craft or drive the behaviors commonly associated with loyalty. So for the young engineers out there, those behaviors are typically, some of you have probably heard these before, those behaviors are typically, well, we want our customers to come back. That's always a good thing, right? Yasin, we want them to buy more from us. From the business perspective, we would say that we're trying to get a greater wallet share. We want them to, and everybody's heard this one, we want them to engage in positive word of mouth, or as some of my colleagues like to say, positive word of mouse, because they're making their decisions and they're sharing their experiences right online. And then for me, as a designer, I find constructive feedback to be the most important because we can use that to inform and improve our designs for our customers. So I would say for the engineers out there, it's very important to understand customer experience because typically we're stuck, Yasin, as you know, we're stuck working primarily with IT stakeholders. That's because we started out as a routing and switching company. And we want to have those meaningful conversations, however, with the business. And the way that you do that is you've got to start thinking about, well, what does the business care about? They care about customer experience design. How do I keep my customers coming back? So,
Absolutely.
And we can absolutely, I'm sure you'll ask other questions that will help guide these young engineers into steps they can take to become CX practitioners.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm sure, while working as a CX practitioner, you run into a lot of people that you have to interact with, like, who are your typical stakeholders, not only in, at Cisco as well, like within your own organization, but also when you're talking to the customer, like who are those key personas that you talk to get to the point where you would like to basically, convince the customer on the concept that you want to deliver.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Yasin. It's there's a lot of stakeholders, and I would call it multidimensional. Obviously, there are customer teams and customer stakeholders. So we deal a lot with those, and it can be all the way up and down the organizational chain. It just depends on their interest in customer experience. Typically, the conversation does start in IT. But when we ask IT questions around customer experience, it's something they don't know too much about. They know it's important to their organization, but they don't know a whole lot about it. So they usually, as the gatekeeper, they've always got that hand up in our face saying you can't talk to the business. But when we start talking customer experience, they gladly open the gate for you. And then you could be talking to anyone in the organization. You might be talking to a chief marketing officer or a chief customer officer, some senior executives around customer experience. It could be anybody in the organization, wherever they've assigned customer experience. So that's with the customer. Then we've got our partners. As you know, we have a large ecosystem of partners. A lot of business to business organizations do. We've got a lot of partners and they have their own value added services. So a lot of times when we do customer experience engagements and we really try to understand what businesses want, Cisco might not be able to provide a solution. So one of our partners might be able to do that. So we'll reach out to partner organizations and sometimes they can help us bridge some gaps. Another set is the third party. Sometimes neither Cisco nor our partners can provide solutions. So we've got to have broad knowledge about what the solutions are, technical solutions are out there in the world that are offered by third parties because maybe they're a better fit. And we hate saying that. As a business, we want to sell our own solutions, but the reality is we want to be seen as a trusted advisor with the companies with whom we consult. And then finally, of course, there's the Cisco internal stakeholders. And as you know, Yasin, we have a very broad portfolio and opportunities that we identify within a business might call upon any professional, any TSA, any engineer across that entire portfolio. So lots of multidimensional stakeholders actually get called into the process at any given time. You can unwittingly, turn over a rock, and all of a sudden there's a new opportunity right there, and you're inviting a colleague that is not in my space in contact center, but maybe they're in collaboration, or maybe they're in messaging, or maybe they're in security. So this happens all the time. So those are typically the stakeholders. I wish that could be a smaller set of people, but it's generally very large.
Yeah, I think it's a good problem to have because, as you do, further discovery, then you further, find out about the other opportunities, right? Which you never have any idea until you basically start poking around and talk to different people. And that's basically the gist of a sales role, right? When you talk with too many people, then you discover a lot of things which you never had any idea about, how the customer was working and what pain points they were going through within their business. Um, okay, so I'm sure when you talk to a lot of people, you always run into challenges, right? Sometimes maybe friction between the organization. Um, can you tell us any example, like what kind of challenges that you run into, and how do you resolve them? Whether this is friction within different organization or process related.
So there's a couple of different challenges I can think of. I mentioned it before, but I think it's important to revisit it given this question. Um, as I said before, Cisco really started out as a routing and switching company, which means that primarily our relationship has been with IT, and IT has been that gatekeeper who, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
has kept that gate pretty well tightly closed and secured so that we can't really get to the business. Um, so that's a huge challenge is getting around IT. Now we used to practice, and I'm sure everyone that's listening will appreciate this. You practice your 30, 60, 90-second elevator pitches. But oftentimes you don't have an audience for even that long. And sometimes, a lot of times those pitches didn't work. So to get around, or I'm sorry, to get the blessing of IT to go to the business, the challenge was, well, what do we need to ask IT so that they will convey us to the business, so that they're a partner in getting us to the business? And that question is, from my perspective, it's what's your CX strategy? So that's how we solve that challenge, because IT professionals are the enablers. They don't create the strategy related to customer experience or even digital transformation. They are
Mm-hmm.
just the enablers. And so they know that's very important to their company. Every business today is talking about customer experience, probably as much as they're talking about cloud these days. So when we ask these types of questions, that hand immediately goes down and they put us in touch with somebody on the business side who cares about these things. And I think too, it's so effective, Yasin, because it's not perceived as a threat to IT. It doesn't create any immediate work for them. And I think that's mostly what they're afraid of is, oh, you guys are going to go pitch a lot of stuff to the business, and then the business is going to want all of that. And then we've got to come up with the time, money, and resources to do it all. This isn't a threat to them. This is a discovery. This is understanding where they are as a business with customer experience and customer experience design. Another challenge that we often come into is, you know, uh, we will sit down ultimately with the business and we'll pitch to them this whole discovery idea. Let's sit down. You just mentioned it a moment ago. We want to sit down and we want to understand your strategy or your vision for customer experience. But to help you get there, we have to understand where you are right now, right? So the
Yeah.
first question in any discovery, we typically get that. Once you get over to the business side and you say, can we do a full contact center business discovery? And it doesn't have to be contact center. This could work for any of my colleagues across our entire capability set. So you sit down with the customer though, and you're not following a checklist here. You're just asking questions. You just bring a keen childlike interest to these conversations. That's all you have to do. It's fun. It's an enjoyable engagement, but you have to ask them, what's your vision for customer experience of the future? That could be, what's your vision for cloud? What's your vision for collaboration? It could be anything that you want.
Mm-hmm.
This applies to all of my colleagues out there. And once you know where they want to go, then we can come back to, okay, well, where are you today? So you begin to pick apart whether they're applications, people, process, and technology problems. And you're specifically trying to identify the gaps between where they are and where they want to go. And then it is our job and our challenge, a very big challenge, to bridge those gaps, right? Now, as we go through those, Yasin, as you might imagine, if you're talking to a customer and you ask them to express their problems, first of all, there's no shortage of problems. They're going to give you all kinds of problems, and it's important to take really, really good notes. But as they discuss and share their problems, they go down a lot of rabbit holes. And we don't reel them in. We don't try to pull them out back out of the rabbit hole. We just let them go on and describe all their pain points. We don't want them to forget that little digression. We don't, if you pull them back in, they might forget it. We don't want them to forget it. We can use our
just
notes.
Just like in design thinking, we call that fish tank, right? So if you have a digressing idea, just put them in the fish tank, and then we can, look at it later.
And the beautiful part of that is, so think about this. I'm a contact center TSA, technology solutions architect, and so my bent is really leaning towards contact center and contact center design. But what do you think happens when I'm asking questions about contact center and they go down and the customer goes down a rabbit hole? Well, those rabbit holes could lead to other opportunities across an entire portfolio, things that I'm not qualified to speak to. But we're not there to solve the problem at that point. We're only there to discover what the problems are. And so when we come back with all this rich data about all their problems and their gaps between where they are and where they want to go, a lot of times what they really need is not something that I can deliver in the contact center space. It's not in the contact center portfolio. It might be related to security. For example, a really great one is when you're watching agents work, contact center agents work, many times I've seen the clocking hourglass, the hourglass that spins round and round while they're talking to their customers. And so what do? They fill that gap with conversation. They have to find a way to keep the customer engaged until their system is responding again. Well, what does that represent? That represents an opportunity for a network assessment, to get the networking guys in there to help them figure out why do we have this clocking going on in the first place. So these are the sorts of challenges. I think to summarize that, Yasin, I would say that there are many, many different challenges, and the goal is to familiarize yourself with as many products and solutions, technical solutions, products that you can. That includes, everything that we have in our handbag at Cisco, as well as what our partners are doing, what third parties can do for the customer, because frankly, oftentimes we're not the right solution, but we can be a trusted partner. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. And it's not being an expert, it's being conversant. Where do I have to go? Who do I need to talk to facilitate this conversation? And so you become a facilitator, really. So those are some of the challenges that we have to overcome.
Yeah, and I think I would definitely second that, because a lot of engineers, when they try to become, well versed in the technology, they try to go to the deepest level. Right. And if you want to be a consultant or a trusted advisor, then you cannot be a deep level expert in every single technology, right? So you have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and understand what's happening in the industry. So if you understand at a high level a little bit about technology and what's happening in a business operation, then you can, as you said, you can be a facilitator, that you know who to reach out to in order to get this problem solved. So it's a very important point.
To add on to that, I would also say, start a card collection, start a little file of some sort, whether it's electronic or on an actual, excuse me, 3x5 card, and write down specialties, people who are really good at their job, what they do. This could be partners, this could be Cisco employees. Excuse me for one moment. The goal here is to when a problem comes up for a customer, you want to know who you can go to that will absolutely knock the response out of the park. Start your collection, get it together, a list of names and expertise within Cisco, within our partner organizations, even within third-party organizations, whom you can bring to the table, who will lend credibility to you. So I would recommend that as something you do early in your career, and it will make you be immensely more successful than if you try to go deep and all by yourself. It just doesn't scale very well.
Absolutely. Do you have a very high level chart that shows the discovery process? Like if you have something handy, you can bring it up. If not, that's fine. We can move on.
Yeah, I don't, because as I said, Yasin, we used to back in the day, and any older engineers that may listen to this will go, Well, yeah, when we did discoveries back in the day, there was a big, long Excel spreadsheet with a lot of questions on it, and you sent that over to the customer, and then the customer
Yeah.
would they would slump down in their chair, I'm sure, when they saw it, and they're like, "Man, I don't have time to answer all these questions," and eventually they would get it done. Um, the most enjoyable part about this process is it's not it, it's a process that's just very, very fluid. Um, we go to IT. We ask them if they have a CX strategy. If they don't have a CX strategy, we ask them whom we can talk to. They always give us a name of that person. They do want to help us. Then we ask that person, can we share with you an overview? Now um, it take me a minute to get to it, Yasin, but it is the discovery overview, what we actually share with the customer so that we can get the overview. I think I have that handy if you want me to bring that up. This is a beauty, Yasin. What this is so as I said before, the process. I've asked IT if I can speak to somebody who knows something about their customer experience strategy. Now that could be a digital transformation strategy, that could be a cloud strategy for my colleagues that do cloud. It could be anything
Mm-hmm.
real. If you need to talk to the business, if you need to talk to somebody specific within an organization, try to get it down to a single question that will allow them to assist you. So for us, we simply say, hey, we want to talk to somebody about strategy. Now, when we have that person, we say, look, let us come in and do a full contact center business discovery because you have a strategy, or at least you have a vision, but we need to understand where you are. Otherwise, we can't help you bridge the gap to achieve that vision. So here's what we call our business discovery offer. It's just an overview of the process. It's 9 slides. It's super quick. It's super simple. You can see very quickly what we're doing here. We share with them the agenda. We say, look, here's the agenda. These are the folks the areas that we need to speak to. This one was for a specific customer you see there at the top. And we say, these are the areas that we need to speak to. And notice something very, very important. Down there on the bottom, there's a little note that says no more than 1 hour maximum per agenda item listed above. What that means is we'll only talk about each of these items for no more than 1 hour, which means that any knowledge experts in any of these areas will only consume 1 hour of their time. They love that. It's not a half a day engagement with any single person. It's not a full day engagement. Now, we've certainly had customers that will come in and they'll stay with us all day long. But we're telling them right out the
Yeah.
gate, you don't need to do that. The next thing we do is we say, hey, here are the attendees that typically come to these things. So these are the folks that you would want to invite. Anybody who has a vested interest in contact center, in customer experience vision, in customer experience management, and basically contact center stakeholders and customer experience stakeholders. These are the sorts of folks that you would invite to that meeting. And again, notice the note on the bottom. We want no more than 1 hour maximum from each individual here. And they love this. They love it when you do this because we've just kept this very simple. So we just say, hey, and this will change depending on who we're talking to. We'll say, hey, here are some of the things that we hope to achieve when we go through this discovery process. Now, I'll tell you that some of these will stay static. Outcomes is very important to them. Operational efficiencies, I can tell you, Yasin, there are 3 things that the C-suite care about most. The 3 business outcomes they love and care about the most. It's operational efficiency, customer acquisition, and customer retention. So generally, you want to speak in terms of those things, right? And
Those
so
3.
it's not unusual to see operational efficiency on here and
Yeah.
things that suggest acquisition and retention.
Of course, you have to tie that.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, you have to tie all back to those 3 pillars that you mentioned, because otherwise the C-suite will not be, they will not take interest.
Well, that's their buckets of money. That's their,
Yeah.
if you want to have a project, a program that is funded, if you can frame it relative to one of those 3 buckets or one of those 3 key business outcomes, then you have a really great chance of getting funded and having your initiatives
Absolutely.
sponsored by the C-suite. So we bring up something like this, and oftentimes we're coached by the customers to, oh, hey, for us, it's these business drivers. And so then we just change these and we socialize it through the organization. We show them an example of an executive summary. Yasin, years ago, we used to, typically the analysis on this is anywhere from 80 to 120 PowerPoint pages. We do that for a very specific reason. Well, you can imagine the C-suite does not want to go, does not want to go through all that. So we said, well, what would the C-suite like? So we boiled it down to a single page executive summary. So what you see on this page is key findings. These are the primary themes, the pain points that rose to the surface throughout all of the interviews. These were repeated many times. And so we know that these are the most important things to the business. These are the key findings. Now, there are many more, but these are usually the top 4 or 5. There in the lower right-hand corner then are the recommendations. Now, what we typically do, and you don't see it here, is we'll put links. So we'll say, here are high-level recommendations, and then we'll link to another spot within the presentation that actually speaks to this next page here, something like this. So you may have, for example, we had one number to call. We want one number to call. So that would have been a high-level recommendation. They wanted to get everything down to a single toll-free number. And so we would link it to this, and then we would just discuss just this one, not the whole page, just this one. The good news is that they can't unsee what's on the rest of the page. So it piques their interest and they want to go in and look at the rest of the deck and see what other proposed initiatives that we've recommended for them. So they love the layout of this. And sometimes this level of effort, they want us to say, hey, give it a high, medium, or low designation. They may change that. Or they may say, can you frame that in terms of cost? So is it high, medium, or low in terms of cost? We'll do it however they want to do it. It's easy to do this because, first of all, Yasin, we're giving it the name. We're calling it, we get to choose, so we get to be creative and call it whatever we want, something appropriate. We give a description of the initiative, very succinct. And over here, really, this area, the justification is, it might be some things that we know just because we're engineers and we know that this is a value, but oftentimes the justification is simply a quote that we got during the discovery. You told us that you're not getting this. You told us that you're clocking. You told us that you're having this application problem. So we put that right in there. And guess what? When you do that, you can't get it wrong. It came right out of what we used to say, the horse's mouth. So there's no way you can get it wrong. Yeah. It's very successful. And then at the end of that, we say it's always 3 steps, 3 things that we want to do. We always frame it in terms of 3 things. So let us do this full contact center business discovery for you. And it's going to focus on these things. It's not going to cost you anything. It's this, we can't do our jobs. We can't really help you get from where you are to where you want to be unless we really understand your pain points, unless we really understand what the gaps are between where you are and where you want to go. And it really resonates with them, and they always let us come back and do the discovery at this point. And then after we usually take about a month to analyze all those notes that we brought in, just to look over them and try to align a pain point or a problem to an actual solution. And as I said, some of the solutions are not Cisco solutions or partner solutions. Some of them are third-party solutions.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, as a matter of fact, our recommendations, they don't list a single Cisco product or solution, not one. But we do that because we don't want to box ourselves in the corner, and we want the customer to ask the question, okay, Cisco, I agree with you. Who can help us with this problem? Now you've put the customer back in control. They're in charge, and they are they're calling the shots. And then from there, you become a facilitator. You bring in the right resources and set up the meetings, sometimes demonstrations. And demonstrations at this point is a good thing, because demonstrations at this point, demonstrations should appropriately fall at the end of the engagement, just before you purchase, right? So you can see the linearity in what we're doing here and how it actually leads to not just one purchase, but it leads to a whole lot of purchases.
It can open up the doors to other opportunities, for sure.
It really opens the floodgate. We provide the list of proposed initiatives to the customer and more importantly, to the account management team. Now they're walking in lockstep with one another for 2 to 3 years of projects or initiatives that we've now put in their pipeline. It's a
Wow.
it's a
This
beautiful
is
thing.
this is exciting. This is exciting. So typically, how long is a sales cycle for a single project? That's a project like this, how long does it take typically?
Oh, okay. So um, from the beginning to the end, from the time we have the conversation with IT to the time that we get to the appropriate stakeholders, and we make this presentation, that's usually less than a month. Now,
Mhm.
once you've done your discovery itself and you understand the pain points, and I did want to point out that in that discovery, there is no paperwork to follow. You open it up by simply saying, hey, we know where you want to go. We're trying to understand where you are now. Help us with
Yeah.
that. Describe any pain points along the way. So that's just conversational. After we've collected all of our notes, and that's usually a single day for a single contact center. So one day.
Hmm.
If they want us to do 4 or 5 contact centers, well, it can be up to a week.
Right.
After we have that data, it's about a month to do the analysis. You want to make
Okay.
sure you're very, very thorough about this. And probably, to be honest with you, the whole output, the findings and recommendations is probably the topic for another call, Yasin, because there's some value adds in there as well.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about? From the time you walk in the door and you ask for about the CX strategy to the time
Like
you,
the entire sales cycle from the time you start, can, talk to the IT to the point when you actually close the deal, like when you get the booking. Like, what is the
oh, that can
typical?
be as little as 3 months, 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
And remember, I'm in the global enterprise segment, so I'm dealing with very large customers. If you're dealing
And
with a
their
much,
sales cycles are long.
yeah, the sales cycles are very long, and remember, there's
Hmm.
annual budgeting cycles too. So you may miss that cycle, and literally have to wait
Yeah.
until the next budget cycle before you can get in the door. But you've planted the seeds, is the point, and we're
Exactly.
constantly then adding to the pipeline. So yeah, I've seen it in as little as a couple of months. You have your first sale and you're off to the races. And I've seen it as long as, up to a year before it
Yeah.
starts. The beautiful
Depending
thing
upon the
here,
customer. Mm.
beautiful thing is once it starts, Yassine, it's continuous because
Hmm.
you've given them a proposed list of initiatives that can span a roadmap, if you will, that can span several years. So
Yep.
it's the gift that really keeps giving to the account teams.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. All right, so I think we are almost at the end of the time of this podcast. So finally, what you want to recommend to the audience in terms of the learning resources or content, like what they can uh, read through or watch videos on CX in
Absolutely.
terms of like building their skill set, and also if there is any certification that you want to recommend that they might
Sure.
pursue.
Yeah, like I said, back in 2002, Fred Reichheld, this is when I got hooked in Yassine. 2002, Fred Reichheld, who was really the father of Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score, just look it up. A lot of companies use that. It's an experience metric. And it asks the question, what's your likelihood to recommend? It all began back in 2002 when the Harvard Business Review posted his article or featured his article on the one number you need to grow. That was the name of the article. I was hooked way back then. But certifications didn't come along until much later. And so there's a lot of very good ones out there that you should look to get. Now, if you want credibility, not just as an engineer, but as a customer experience practitioner, which means to the business, oh, you know how to take technical requirements and translate those into jargon that the business can understand, which is incredibly valuable and lends immensely to your credibility, then I would suggest that your engineers go out to the CXPA.org. Now that's Customer Experience Professional Association.org. And the reason I say that is because that's where there are tons of resources around the CCXP. That's a certification. It's coveted, it's respected. It's called the Certified Customer Experience Professional. And out there on the cxpa.org website are tons and tons, hundreds of different webinars and interviews and documents that you can review around the 6 core competencies that you'll be tested against. So you'll find the 6 core competencies out there. Since you don't know what they are, just to help you look for them, it's customer-centric culture is one of them, organizational adoption and accountability, voice of the customer, understanding the customer, customer insight, experience design. You can tell how important that is, and improvement. Probably the biggest area of the exam, and they cover this quite a lot on the CXPA.org website, is metrics, measurements, and return on investment. So you can imagine that's important to companies.
Yeah.
And then finally, CX strategy. So it helps you to understand all those things and have conversations. And it's a lot easier, Yasin, than the typical, architectural diagrams and things that we have to do today. Those are difficult conversations. These are actually pleasant conversations to have. So I encourage you to go out there, check out the CXPA.org website and the resources to actually study for that CCXP exam. Also, there are training partners listed on the CXPA.org website. So if you want formal training on it, you could select one of the training partners to get formal training on customer experience. And then finally, since NPS, there are many experiential measures. So, but I have found that Net Promoter Score is very, very popular and very common across large organizations. You've heard of others, CSAT. We've used that at Cisco as well. Customer effort score, first contact resolution. These are all experience metrics, but NPS is probably still the most popular. And you can go out to, it was a company called Satmetrics that first provided the training on Net Promoter Score, but they were acquired by NICE back in 2017. If you want the training on NPS, then you have to go to NICE Satmetrics Academy. And so you can find that out online, NICE, and then Satmetrics in the Academy. So those are the 2 biggest ones I could recommend. And also, Yasin, if any of your listeners, viewers are interested, I've put a detailed document together of resources that are based on human-centered design. So there's a number of books. Of course, books you have to pay for. There's free resources in there. There are websites that you can go to and articles that you can read. So certainly, if you're interested in that, Yasin, I can give that to you, and you can post it for your listeners.
So what I can do, I can put those links into the description of this video on YouTube. So for viewers and audience, please look into the description. There will be a lot of links to the content, some free, some paid. So feel free to look at it. Hopefully, this will be very helpful. All right, thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate your time here. I know that you're a busy guy, and it's hard to take an hour away from your schedule, so really appreciate it. Any last comment that you wanna leave with the audience?
I would just say, we mentioned earlier, Yasin, that the 3 biggest things that the C-suite care about, and they always agree, by the way, to these 3: operational efficiency, customer acquisition, and customer retention. Now, what do those represent? They represent numbers. It's all about the numbers. We all know, Warren Buffett, who is the president, chairman, and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He coined the phrase, accounting is the language of business. Now, we've modified that a bit, and we say that numbers are the language of business. And if we agree to that, if we all agree to that, then we need to focus less on the technology initially and focus more on the numbers and how businesses can achieve their numbers.
Of course.
So when you think about it, when we think about the experience metric, like Net Promoter Score, businesses want to improve that metric. After all, it does appear in their quarterly and annual reports. So they want to improve that number, but it doesn't improve all by itself. There are actors that play upon that needle, that get that needle to move. And so, and keep in mind, Net Promoter Score is so well loved because it's a leading indicator of revenue. So if I improve that experience score, I improve revenue at the same time. So, but what moves that needle? Well, businesses have a large number of metrics and measurements that they follow. The ones they love the most, they term key performance indicators. So they boiled it down to 10, 12, 20, it's a smaller number. And these key performance indicators should complement what they're trying to do with customer experience. Sometimes they don't. And you can find that out in the discovery process. So we want to make sure that the numbers in the key performance indicators, those those quality and quantity type of metrics, that they actually complement the experiential metric. So
Yeah.
those two play together. Once we know that, then and only then can we start looking at enabling technologies and go, oh,
Yeah.
these are the technologies you need to focus on if these are your goals, your financial goals. If these are the outcomes you're going for, then okay, now we understand what technologies we should be recommending. So you see what's happening there as part of the closing thought is you've got to look at the gap between where they want to go and where they currently are. And you've got to look at what they're trying to achieve relative to business outcomes. And usually you can discern that by looking at the numbers. And I think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. From a technology perspective, engineers always start with the technology and they work the other direction. I would advocate that it's very powerful and it's very well received. If you start with the numbers and work backwards to the technology, it's going to lend a lot of credibility to you as an engineer, and you're going to have a lot more successes. And
Absolutely.
for you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Last thing I want to say is, this podcast is recorded on Cisco WebEx platform. So we are using Cisco technology completely, everything. My Cisco headset, Cisco device, video endpoint DX80 that we use for high definition video audio conferencing. And if you want to have that experience, always use Cisco WebEx. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, audience. I will see you in my next video. Take care.